My bank app logged me out mid-refresh, and when I got back in, every account was at zero. He grabbed my phone before I could speak and started answering the bank like he was me. I wasn't supposed to see the pending transfer, but it was still processing when I found it. The fraud agent said the login came from my device while my son was standing right in front of me. I had less than 10 minutes to stop the last transfer, and he told me not to touch anything. I thought it was a mistake until I saw his messages telling someone, "She trusts me." The balance wasn't gone. It was sitting in an account that didn't have my name on it. He didn't deny it when I asked. He just said, "You already approved it. The website holding my money stopped loading while we were staring at it." He reached across me and started answering the bank's security questions in my voice before I could even get a word out. And for a second, I just froze with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to him say my birthday like it belonged to him. Like this wasn't the first time he'd done it. And the agent on the other end didn't hesitate, just kept going, asking about recent transactions while I stared at my own son and tried to understand why he wouldn't look at me. I pulled the phone back, my hand shaking enough that I almost dropped it, and said I didn't authorize any of it, that something was wrong. And there was this pause, just long enough to feel deliberate, before the agent said the transfers had all been confirmed through my device, my login, my home network. And that detail landed harder than anything else because it meant this didn't come from outside. It started here, somewhere inside the house I was standing in. I turned slightly, scanning the kitchen like something might still be out of place, like I'd missed a sign sitting right in front of me, but everything looked the same. The same coffee cup in the sink, the same light coming through the window, except now it all felt off, like the normal version of this room had already ended and I hadn't noticed. I asked him when this started, keeping my voice low so the agent wouldn't hear, and he hesitated just a fraction too long before saying it wasn't what I thought, which wasn't an answer. And the way he said it, controlled, careful, made it worse because it sounded practiced. I stepped away from him, pressing the phone closer as the agent asked if I recognized the external account that had been linked earlier in the week. And I felt something tighten in my chest because I didn't, not even vaguely. And when she read the last 4 digits out loud, I realized I had no memory of ever approving something like that. Not on my phone, not on my laptop, not anywhere, which didn't make sense unless someone else had done it while I wasn't paying attention. I glanced at him again, and he was already moving, pacing now, running his hand over his mouth like he was trying to think ahead of whatever was coming next. And that movement didn't match panic. It matched someone trying to stay in control. The agent said there was still 1 transfer pending, scheduled to clear soon, and asked if I wanted to place an immediate freeze. And before I could answer, he cut in again, sharper this time, telling me not to do that it would complicate things. And I felt this sudden, cold shift in my stomach because no one who was trying to help me would say that. I turned my body slightly so he couldn't see my screen and told her yes, to stop it, to freeze everything. And she said she'd try but needed to verify one more detail. And while she spoke, I noticed his phone light up on the counter behind him, a message preview flashing for less than a second before he grabbed it and turned it face down too quickly, like he thought I might have seen something I wasn't supposed to. I didn't say anything about it, just watched him as he typed something fast with his back half turned to me. And that small, quiet movement felt louder than anything else in the room because it didn't feel like a reaction. It felt like part of something already in motion. The agent came back on the line and said the transfer was still processing, but might not be reversible if it had already been released to the external platform. And I felt my grip tighten on the phone as I asked where exactly it was going. And she repeated the same unfamiliar name I'd seen in my transaction history. A platform I didn't recognize, didn't remember, didn't trust. And when I looked up at him again, really looked this time, he still wasn't meeting my eyes. Just standing there with his phone in his hand like he was waiting for something to finish, something I wasn't part of. And that's when I realized whatever was happening hadn't stopped yet. It was still unfolding, right in front of me, and I was already behind it. I picked up his phone and realized this didn't start last night. I ended the call before she could ask anything else and opened my account settings with my thumb still shaking. Because if that external account had been linked from my profile, then there had to be a record of it. And I needed to see exactly when it happened and how it was approved. And the second the page loaded, I saw it. Added 3 days ago. Verified. Marked as trusted, with my own device listed right next to it, which didn't make sense because I'd been out that afternoon. I remembered the drive. The receipt still sitting in my purse, and I turned toward him and asked where he was that day, keeping my voice level even though something inside me was starting to tilt. And he answered too quickly, saying he'd been home all day, which should have been nothing except it landed wrong because I hadn't told him why I was asking. I stepped past him into the living room and saw his laptop still open on the coffee table, the screen active, and I moved closer before he could say anything, because whatever was happening was clearly running through something in this house. And there it was again. That same platform name from the transfers, pulled up in a dashboard that wasn't mine, numbers shifting slightly in real time like they hadn't settled yet. And for a split second I thought maybe this was where it had gone. Maybe it wasn't lost. Just moved. But then I noticed the name in the corner didn't match mine. Didn't match anything connected to me at all. And that small detail snapped whatever hope I had been holding onto. He came up behind me and told me not to touch it, his voice lower now, tighter, and I turned just enough to see that he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at my hands, like he was trying to control what I did next. And that shift, from explaining to controlling, felt like crossing a line we hadn't named yet. I asked him whose account it was, and he hesitated just long enough to make the answer obvious before he said it was temporary, that it was part of the process. And that word, process, didn't calm anything because there was nothing structured about this anymore, nothing official, just my money sitting under someone else's login while another transfer had already gone through. I reached for his laptop anyway, scrolling through the page despite him stepping closer, and the transaction history lined up too neatly with what I'd just seen on my bank app. Same amounts, same timing, like this wasn't a coincidence. It was a path. And that realization hit harder than anything the bank had said because it meant this had been coordinated, not accidental. His phone buzzed again behind me, and this time I didn't wait. I picked it up before he could react. And when I unlocked it, the messages were already open. A thread pinned at the top with no name attached, just a number. And the last message read, "Final batch clearing now," time-stamped seconds ago. And my chest tightened because that matched exactly what the agent had just told me. I scrolled up, faster now, and saw instructions laid out in plain language. Transfer limits, timing windows, even reminders about what to say if the bank flagged anything. And then I saw my own words reflected back at me. Phrases he'd used earlier, written out like a script. And that's when something cold settled in, because this wasn't him figuring things out as he went. This was him following something step by step. I turned the screen toward him and asked what this was, not raising my voice, just holding it there between us. And for a second he didn't answer, just stared at it like he was deciding how much I already knew. And then he said he thought it was an investment at first, that it looked legitimate, that people were making money. And I could hear the strain in his voice, but it didn't match the messages in my hand. It didn't match the timing, and I pointed to the earlier texts, weeks back, where they asked if he had full access, and he'd replied that he did, that I trusted him, and I asked him when exactly he stopped thinking it was real, because there had to be a moment where this changed, and he didn't answer that, just shook his head slightly like the question itself was something he couldn't deal with. Behind us, the laptop chimed softly, and I turned back just in time to see the balance drop again. Faster now. Not steady anymore, but pulling down in uneven jumps. And I felt the urgency spike sharp and immediate, because whatever system was on the other end wasn't waiting for anything now. It was taking everything it could. I grabbed my phone again and reopened the bank app, trying to find anything left to lock down. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A second external account listed under recent activity, added just minutes ago, still pending verification, and I looked up at him slowly. The realization hitting all at once that this wasn't finished, not even close, and whatever he'd started, it was still expanding. I stared at that second external account, still waiting for verification, and felt something snap into place. Because nothing about that was accidental. Not the timing, not the pattern, and definitely not the fact it had been added while I was standing right there. And I turned his phone back toward me and scrolled again, slower this time, forcing myself to read every line instead of just reacting. And that's when I saw it. One message I'd missed before, buried between confirmations. A simple instruction sent earlier that morning. If she notices, add a new link and move the remainder immediately. And my throat went dry, because this wasn't just cleanup. This was a contingency, something they'd planned for, something he'd agreed to before I even knew anything was wrong. I looked up at him and asked, very quietly, if he'd just tried to move whatever was left again. And he didn't answer, just stared at the floor. And that silence felt heavier than anything he could have said, because it confirmed what I already knew. That even after everything, even after I'd found out, he was still following their instructions. The laptop chimed again behind me, and I turned just in time to see the balance dip one more time. Smaller now, but still moving, still slipping away in uneven drops. And I felt this sharp, almost panicked urgency hit because this wasn't over yet, not until there was nothing left anywhere. I moved fast, grabbing my phone and pulling up the bank app again, going straight into security settings, revoking every device, every session, everything tied to my account. And for the first time, he actually stepped toward me like he was going to stop me, saying I didn't understand what that would do, that it could freeze everything in the wrong place. And I turned on him then, really turned, and told him that was the point, because whatever was happening on the other end was already wrong. He stopped mid-step, like he hadn't expected that, and for a second we just stood there in this strange silence, the only sound that faint hum from the laptop as the last numbers kept shifting. And then his phone buzzed again on the table between us, louder this time in the quiet, and neither of us moved right away. But I reached it first, picking it up and unlocking it before he could react, and the new message sat there at the top of the thread. Why did activity stop? Followed by another almost immediately. Did she call the bank? And I felt something cold settle into my chest, because whoever was on the other end wasn't guessing. They were watching in real time. I held the phone up so he could see it and asked him how they would know that unless he'd given them access beyond just my money. And that's when he finally broke. Not loud, not dramatic, just this quiet collapse in his expression as he said they'd had him install something weeks ago, something that let them monitor performance. And the way he said it made it sound like he'd believed it at the time, like he'd convinced himself it was normal. And I felt this wave of realization hit all at once because that explained everything. The logins from my device, the timing, the way they'd stayed ahead of every move I made. They hadn't just taken my money, they'd been inside my accounts, inside my network, watching. I stepped back from him without thinking, putting space between us like that might somehow separate me from what he'd done, and asked him if they could still access anything now. And he hesitated just long enough to make the answer worse before saying he didn't know, that he'd tried to remove it but wasn't sure it worked. And that uncertainty landed harder than any confirmation because it meant this wasn't contained. It wasn't over, not even close. I looked around the room again, the same room that had felt normal an hour ago, and realized I didn't know what in it was still safe, what was still mine, and the weight of that settled in slowly, heavier than the money, heavier than the betrayal, because this wasn't just about what he'd taken, it was about what he'd opened the door to. Behind me, the laptop went quiet, the balance finally hitting something close to zero, and for a second neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke, and I thought about calling the police, about shutting everything down completely, about what this would mean for him, for me, for everything that came after. And instead I just stood there, holding his phone in my hand, staring at that last message still waiting for a reply, and realized the worst part wasn't that I didn't know what to do next. It was that whatever I chose, I was the one who would have to live with it. I could shut everything down, call the police, and end it. But I knew the second I did, I wouldn't just be reporting a crime. I'd be choosing who my son was from that point on.